Hello and welcome to the part 4 of this SwiftUI tutorial. My name is Alex and today we are gonna work on our SwiftUI to-do list app. We created this project and implemented basic things such as adding new tasks and marking them as complete. We use MVVM approach and we use SwiftUI and Combine in this app. And today we're gonna add core data layer. So let's start doing this. So as we encapsulate all the layers, now let's create some abstract layer that will hide core data behind it. So in case we'll need to replace our core data layer with something else, for instance, we'll decide to use Realm at some point, it won't be such a nightmare. So for now we have our TL task as data model, and our data manager is responsible for returning the data to our view models. Now we'll create a DB helper protocol and then we'll create a core data database manager and it will conform it to this new protocol. So right click somewhere in the project navigator and choose new file. Choose Swift file, click next and call it DB helper. Let's create a protocol DB helper here. Depending on what we are using, core data, Realm or something else, we might have different types of our objects. So we need to create a type alias for our object type. Or let's just call it object. And also predicate might be different, so let's create an associated type for predicate too. Just in case, let's add DB here in case object or predicate is used somewhere else. But it's not a big deal in protocols. So we need to implement basic CRUD interface for it. So let's start doing this. Use create method with object of object type. Next one would be read. And here we use object type. Because we might have different types, for instance, we'll have TL task type, or maybe in the future we'll have TL list type, and by passing object type, we'll let DB helper know which type of object it needs to return. And we pass predicate here. That can be optional. After all, we need to pass a limit if we need to. And this thing will return us a result with an array of object type or error. Also, we probably need some method such like read first. In this case, we pass the same, but we don't need limit because this method will return only first object. So it'll be easier to use this method when we need to get something, for instance, by looking for ID. Next one would be update our object. And delete. So that's pretty much it, but let's also add an extension for this DB helper so we can use the power of protocols to implement default values for our methods. Let's just copy all this thing here and add default values to our predicate and limit. In case we want to get all objects, we can use this method. Or if we don't need limit, we just can omit this value. And we'll just basically call our read method with the same stuff. That's it. And finally, let's create core data layer. So what we need to do is to add core data to the app, create entities in it, connect them to our Swift structures, initialize core data, and use it in our app. So let's create a new file and call it core data helper. It will be our final class, core data helper, and it will need to conform to DB helper protocol. So we'll need our create, read first, and update methods. But actually no, let's firstly add associated types. So we'll add type alias here, DB object that will be of NSManaged type. Yeah, and let's import core data here. So as you see, this is the only place we added core data so far. And predicate will be our NS predicate. And that's it. So now let's add our methods here. As you can see, Xcode sets proper DB object and DB predicate types here because we set them in our class. Let's add the rest of our methods here. Awesome. Actually, after that, we don't need this type alias anymore because it implicitly understands it depending on these types here. But let's leave it there for now. I think it's fine. Okay, so now we need to add persistent container here. So let's do that. This is an persistent Cloud Kit container, meaning that this info will be stored in iCloud. Let's initialize container here. To-do list. And let's call load persistent stores for this container. For now, if there is an error, let's just simply call file error here. Nice. And let's just return this container. And also let's add a save context method here. So we'll use our persistent container. View context. For now it's fine, we don't need background context, so we'll use this one. So we'll check if the context has changes, then do try context save. Now let's catch errors here, and for now just call this. Let's create a singleton here. Let's go back to to-do list app. And let's add environment modifier here. Okay. and this will be our core data helper, shared persistent container context. Yeah, and actually let's create a variable core data helper here. And let's pass it here. Yeah, and also let's add environmental value here. Scene phase. And here we add on change of scene phase, perform. And here we can add a switch for our phase. You can wait for a while till it suggests us this and click fix. Nice. And whenever we enter background, we need our context to be saved. Nothing among these ones we need for now, so we just add a default break. Great, now our app knows about the database, but we need to create our core data model. Let's actually create a data model file, because we haven't created it yet. Press File, New, File, and choose core data model. Let's call it to the list and press OK. Yeah, so let's click on Add Entity, rename it here. Let's call it Task Entity. We'll add a couple attributes here, such as ID, that will be UUID. Let's open the right panel by clicking this button here. Let's add another one called title, that will be a string, and let's make it non-optional. And finally is completed, which is boolean. That will be non-option, and by default it will be false or no. Awesome. Yeah, so for now we can use it as it is, but for the sake of the tutorial, let's create a Swift class for it manually. To do that, let's click here on Task Entity, and then here, instead of class definition, let's choose Manual. That tells the core data to use a user-generated class that we are gonna create now. Yeah, let's actually select these three files, do right-click and choose New Group from Selection. We'll call it Persistence. And now press Command N and choose New Swift file and call it Task Entity. Let's import core data here. Add an Objective-C thing that is needed for our class, so core data knows about it. And let's create a final class Task Entity that will be inherited from NSManaged object, because it's our core data class. And here we need three simple NSManaged variables: UUID, title, and flag is completed. So now we can start using our core data. But remember, we created this model that encapsulates the data layer, so we need some simple method that will convert our task entity, which is in this managed object, to a TL task. To do that, let's create an extension for task entity. And let's add a variable convert or as TL task that will return our TL task. Now actually let's create a function so we can show that this thing is actually a method. Let's call it func convert to TL task that will return TL task. And here we just basically return our TL task with the given UID, title, and is completed. And now it's time to implement our core data helper methods. Let's go back to core data helper. So create method will simply just call try context save. Okay, and also we need to add a variable context here so we have an easier access to our context. Text is managed object const text, and it will basically use our view context now. And let's call context save here and catch. For now we just woke a fatal error. Okay, so this thing is simple. So we create an object somewhere and we just call context save. Because when we create an object in this context, the only thing that we need to store it is to call context save. It's not, it may be not the best approach here, but for the tutorial's sake, it's fine. So yeah, let's actually move on. So this will be a little bit more complicated. Here we need to create a request for our object type, and yeah, honest fetch request of object type. But before we do that, let's actually make these methods generic ones. So here our type will be generic one. So instead of using this magic object type, we'll use our type here. Well, let's just even call it T. Okay, and we'll do the same for our read first, update and delete. Because we want our object type to be inherited from the object itself. So we're creating a request here. We add in a predicate, our object, to our fetch request. If we had a limit here, we'll add a limit. So our app knows how many items return if we have this limitation. Let's fetch this information from our core data in the try block. In this case, we just return successful completion block with the result as an array of type T of our genetic type, and as a default value we'll return an empty array. We could have just forced unwrap it here because we know that our fetch request is of this type, but yeah, just let's make it maybe a bit safer. In this case we just pass an error here. Read first should be simpler. We can just get a result from our read method. We'll pass object type here, predicate. Limit will be 1 because we need only the very first object. Tasks. We'll just return and in case of failure we'll return failure with this error. Simple as this. Okay, yeah, let's cast it to T, or generic type. And let's just copy this block to our update method, and let's just change it here, error updating. And this one should be simple. We just call delete for this given object. And that's it. So let's recap. We created calculated property context here, and we implemented all these 4 methods. Yeah, there are a lot of fatal errors here, but it's fine for now. In the real project, eventually you may address them because your app shouldn't crash, at least in most cases. Okay, so let's get back to our data manager. Now we need to connect our app to core data helper. Let's import core data here because in our implementation our data manager will know something about core data, but it is fine. And here let's create a variable db helper of type db helper here, or even core data helper for now. I think it should be fine. And yeah, for the sake of our tutorial, we'll just pass it here as a singleton. We don't need to test it, and in most cases we'll just mock data manager in places where we need to test something. So injecting singleton here is fine. If we need to get rid of this in the future, we'll do that. But for now, let's leave it here. Okay, let's implement our methods. First of all, let's get rid of our old array because we don't need it anymore here. And here, instead of doing this, let's create a predicate for our request that will be different depending on what we are looking for here. If it includes completed, we don't need anything, but in case we need to exclude completed items, we'll add this predicate with format is completed equals false. I don't know, yeah. Nice, and let's get a result with explicitly showing the type of our task entity here. And let's call our db helper, and let's call read object type task entity self with our given predicate. Okay, so let's check our result, and in case it's successful, we have an array of task entities. In this case, let's just simply return our task entities mapped into our object. Otherwise, we'll just pass our failure here. We'll evoke fatal error. Great, now let's implement add task method here. So instead of doing all this stuff, we'll just create an entity here, which is task entity, and new task will be just the task entity. This is entity, and this is our context. Yeah, and let's populate all the data. This will be a new UID. This will be our title. And since it's completed, has a default value, we don't need to set it here. And we create it using dbhelper.create method. Nice. And the last one, toggle is completed. First of all, we create a predicate. We need to get our task entity with given UID that has task here. So we need to create a predicate. With format UID equals A, and this will be our task UID. Yeah, and this should be C var argument. Okay, let's request a result from dbhelper by calling read first with given predicate. This will be task entity dot self, and this will be our predicate. Let's get a result. Case task entity. Then we do task entity is completed, toggle, and then call dbhelper update. Check if task entity exists here. We don't need this question mark here anymore. Nice. And in case we have an error, we'll just do nothing. Yeah, and actually I suggest we just refactor this code a bit and create a private method here that will call fetch task entity for task. This will be our TL task, and this will be optional. So we basically leave the same here, and here we just return task entity no matter whether it's nil or not, and in this case we return nil. Yeah, I forgot func here. And let's just get this here. Let task entity calls fetch task entity for task, else return. And we don't need anything here but these two lines. So as you can see, we touched no classes in the app but only data manager. So the rest of the app still nothing about core data and the fact that we changed something. So let's just check it. Let's build the rest and run this app. Okay, so let's create new tasks. Do task work. And we got an error here. Let's address it. Oh, I see. Something isn't right. So here UID, and in our data model we have ID. Yeah. So yeah, here's my mistake. I need to update it and fix it here. Sorry about this, guys. Yeah, great. So we fix it here. Now we need to go back here and fix our fetch request. It should be ID, and this one should be ID too. Okay, let's build it again and check if it works. Hopefully it does. Do taxes. Yeah. Go to gym. And finish video. So let's check it. Let's build around it again. You see this stuff persists here. Great, so it works. Let's try to mark it as done, and I believe there is an error again. Oh yeah, I know, that thing happens. Let's try to call it like this. I don't remember why it happens. No, still the same issue. Yeah, sometimes by some reason okay. Yeah, the problem is that it calls itself, and that's not really great. Oh, I wonder what it is. I guess I needed to implement this one with the default value. Yeah, let's try it again. No. Yeah, for now, let's just, instead of using this thing here, let's just create a new fetch request with limit that will be 1. And we'll address it later, because this extension should work. By some reason it doesn't. And here we just return first element of our result. So if there is any, we'll get it. First as T. Yeah. Let's build run again. Hopefully this time it works. Yeah, it does work. So we can see it's here, and let's stop and build up again. Yeah, still fine. Great. Congratulations, now it's working to-do list app. I know it still lacks a lot of features that you can implement, but at least it's an app written with SwiftUI. So in the next part, we will add lists for our to-do list app, so we can divide our task into different lists. And we'll need to do a migration for core data, and we'll need to change our UI and create a new UI for lists. That sounds interesting. So I'll leave a link below to the complete code, so you can check it if you have any problems. And feel free to ask me anything in the comment section, or if you have any suggestions for features that we should add to this app, or maybe some ideas what another app we should create as a tutorial, just leave it in comments and I would love to do that. So that's it, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.